Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the Open Web Forum curated by Fabric Ventures. I'm Lata, and I'll be your MC for the day. We've had some incredibly engaging discussions over the last 2 days, and looking at the agenda, today promises to be no different. Kicking things off at 10 a.m., we will be thinking critically about the relationships between human values, technology, and society, and tackle the ever-present questions of safety and freedom. Following that, at 11, Jeremy Miller will answer the question, how large is the crypto ecosystem? And to round off the morning sessions at 12 is one for the TikTok fans, as we will be discussing how to empower creators with decentralized media. After our lunch break at 2 p.m. BST, we'll be digging into venture and investing in the open economy. And at 3 p.m., we will be gazing into the future with a deep dive discussion into post-quantum computing. For any pro gamers, tune in for our penultimate session, where we'll be digging into gaming models and the play-to-earn economy. And to close what has been a phenomenal 3 days, we'll be hearing from Vitalik Buterin, a man who needs no introduction on Ethereum's purposeful evolution, interviewed by Richard Waters, West Coast editor of the Financial Times. For regular updates on what's coming on, be sure to check out the Fabric Ventures Twitter at Fabric_VC. But let's get started. Now we have Fabric Ventures venture partner and founder of Orchid Labs, Dr. Stephen Waterhouse, aka Seven. Orchid Labs is a unique decentralized privacy marketplace that brings together the services of leading VPN providers. Since launching in December 2019, Orchid has been increasingly recognized as a leader in digital privacy. In his talk, Seven will discuss how human values are built into our technology and how those values influence society. The next generation of technology can be built upon different values than the last, as questions of safety and freedom continue to evolve. I can't think of anyone better to discuss this topic, so over to you, Seven.
Thanks very much, Lata. Let's see, got some slides going here. Oh, one slide back. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's lovely to be here in London. A beautiful sunny day. As we was just joking in the UK, we just talk about the weather when we're not quite sure what to talk about. It's, again, another unusual way to give a talk. I've got used to doing these remote talks, and now I'm surrounded by some very nice gentlemen with very fancy camera gear here in this room, but looking forward one day to actually standing on a stage again. I'm here to talk about really just some sort of general concepts that have informed the way that, especially today, the way that I think about building companies and investing, and general frameworks for how the area that I work on, which is decentralized systems and cryptocurrencies, the way we think about the values that we're embedding in there. So I had an email address, I think, in 1989. I'm going to date myself now, when I just first started at university, and was using the web before it was really the web. So I've kind of been growing up in the space of the internet for a long time, and working even before crypto in different systems in this space. And we had a lot of really, I guess, sort of, you might call them naive ideas about how this was going to work out. We really started off this idea it's going to be very free, very open, anonymous. Even at one point, we thought it might end up. And I remember being in quite absolute shock when I think it was the summer of 1995, and I remember Netscape had gone public. I was in Palo Alto for the first time, and Yahoo went commercial. And I was like, what the heck? We're going to have like ads. Yahoo's going to be this weird sort of commercial entity. You know, what's next? And cookies, when they came along, just seemed really shocking to me. The idea that people would want to, give up their privacy in return for some apparent convenience. But fast forward many years, and we're in a very different world now. This is just normal to most people. That you're tracked. You have not only the commercial aspect to it, but if we rewind time a little bit to earlier this year, and following the assault on the Capitol and all the protests there, we had a sitting president deplatformed from social media. And it's still deplatformed from social media. And whatever your views on that character, it sets an interesting precedent. Like, what if the next time there's a sitting person in power or a person not in power, and then whoever's in charge of those systems just says, you're off, sorry, no more channel to the public, we're going to shut you down. So this kind of idea of like who makes these rules, like how does this centralization start to really affect the way we build systems and the way that affects society, is something that we've thought a lot about. So how do we get there? Well, I'm sometimes accused of being a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but I actually don't really believe in conspiracy theories. And my best analogy for this is, have you ever organized a party? Have you ever tried to like have some friends around? It's okay when you have 5 people, but when you get it to like 100 people or 200 people, it's really hard to coordinate. And that really informs the idea that conspiracy theories are probably not really true. They're just things that kind of like accidentally, after one step, or like, the idea of like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We're not really trying to track everybody and control everybody and so on, but we get COVID, and it's like, well, now we need to fill in forms and do what we call in the financial industry KYC, know your customer, in order to go shopping. So right now, if you want to be in Germany, you need to take what's called a Schnelltest, which is an antigen test, in order to go shopping. And then once you go shopping, you need to scan a QR code and say who you are and where you are. So we've opted into this idea that in order to just go on a date, you now need to give this information over. And of course, this is a good idea, right? Because, we're protecting societies. But like a lot of things, it's very hard to unwind these processes. Once we've got them in place, I mean, we're still taking off shoes when we go through airport scanners, right? Because one guy did a bad thing with his shoes. So now we're like, well, now, of course, everybody has to take their shoes off. And we have little plastic bags full of little liquids, because, like these liquids are combined in the wrong way could obviously do bad things to planes. Now, I'm not suggesting that we rewind these things in the sense that these things could be dangerous, but no one takes a look at them later to say, well, maybe we should unwind this stuff one day and have a different approach to it. And with the internet, the sort of how we got here, it's really a consequence of centralized designs. So people often talk about centralization being bad. Well, centralization of ad tech technology has been the mechanism by which the entire internet has been built. It's the way that advertising allows us to support media, to support creators, to support the systems that support them, has meant that we've been able to build what we've been able to build without having to add in subscription models and so on, which probably would have slowed down the growth. Well, we have different systems now. We have what's called decentralized systems, and I'll go into some of these soon. The decentralized systems allow us to potentially build different kinds of architectures and embed different kinds of values. So what kind of values do we want? And this is a bit touchy-feely, but the kind of one of the most important things to me is really this idea of individual sovereignty. Now, when in cryptocurrencies, we talk about this a lot. It's like the idea of like, not your keys, not your coins. What does that mean? Well, we use it often to say, if you're storing your coins on an exchange, they're not really yours because you're given the keys to the exchange. If you've got them in a nice, wallet like a ledger, they're yours. You've got it. You know they're yours. Now, that's annoying, right? It's like, well, that's kind of a hassle. I've got to keep this piece of paper somewhere, and I've got to have this little device, and I've got to remember things. But you've gained control of something. You've got now this responsibility, and with that responsibility comes freedom. And so this idea that like you're responsible for these things can extend not just to financial instruments like cryptocurrencies, but also to the way you live your life. And as a privacy advocate, as somebody who started a company in the privacy space, I've increasingly tried to live my life in a way that I talk. Like I've actually really focused on how I protect my privacy, what information I give to people. I bristle when people want me to scan QR codes, and for the good of all. It's something that I believe all of us need to sort of like have some integrity and some consistency in the way we do things, the way we live our lives, versus just doing really what's a kind of theater of privacy or theater of security. And not only living these things, but we can then also design these values into our technology. So if we're careful enough about the way we think about these things, if we think through what means something to us, then perhaps we can build different systems, and perhaps we can build different kinds of societies. And that's quite a sort of a heady thing to say. It's like it's a little bit it's kind of like a little bit of hubris there. But I'm pretty sure that when the guys who built Facebook and Google and so on, when they sat down, they never thought that one day these things would be like that big a deal. And so there's a chance when you're out there thinking of a new company or when you're looking at something to invest, there's a chance that not only you might be very successful, but there's a chance that it actually might make a difference. So I really encourage people to be very conscious about how they do these things. And we had a recent talk with Edward Snowden at our conference Private, which we did earlier this year. We'll be doing another one later this year. And one of the things he kind of left with was the idea of, he said, don't stay safe, stay free. And the other thing he said is, again, really what I've just been echoing is the idea of you have a responsibility when you're building these systems and investing in these systems and using these systems, because we also vote for these systems with our time, with our attention, with our money, to think through carefully what it is you're using, what it is you're building, what it is you're investing in. So I'm going to touch upon one important value, which I spent a lot of time so far in the last few years focusing on and previously, which is privacy as a value. And the idea of encoding privacy using two techniques which are related but distinct, the idea of encryption and also decentralization. So we hear a lot about encryption, but it's like, what is it we're really doing here? The concepts of encryption really date back a very long time. Some of the earliest examples of encryption predate Roman times, but the Roman ciphers, there was a particular cipher used named after Caesar, was one of the first ones that we have knowledge of. More well-known ciphers and techniques are things like the Enigma machine, which was successfully cracked by GCHQ using a lot of work by Alan Turing, which was a machine that allowed the Nazis to encrypt information between people, the generals, and then the people in the field in order to keep this information secret. One of the ironies of when that was actually cracked was that once we knew what was happening on the Allies side, then the question was, well, how do you act upon that information? Because by acting upon the information, if you act on it in too much, then you actually inform your adversary that you've cracked it, and then they might change the cipher and so on. There was kind of like a sort of a rather macabre kind of twist to this whole setup. Well, the basic idea is you're trying to scramble information. You're trying to make it so that myself and my friend who I'm trying to communicate with, we're the only people who know what's happening. And I'll stop there for a second because often when I explain these things, I almost now have to give a caveat. Okay, well, of course, these two people are good, right? These are good people that are trying to communicate good information to one another. They're not trying to do anything bad. But this is where encryption and the mindset around encryption has got this sort of, the narrative is that people who are trying to use encryption must be trying to do something wrong, because if you're a good person in society, you don't have anything to hide. And so whenever someone says this to me now, I'm like, okay, fine, please can you give me your phone and unlock it? I'm like, well, why would I do that? It's like, well, if you have nothing to hide, then like just give me everything you've got, right? And the reality is that it's not about whether you've got something to hide. It's about the idea that you actually have a right to be private. If you want to keep information private, you should have that right. There will always be bad actors in society. It's been, there's been bad actors ever since the days of Adam and Eve, stealing apples and eating them when they're not supposed to. But the idea that you should have the right to express yourself and communicate information without the thought from everybody else that if you're doing that, that you're a bad person, I think is a very dangerous one in society. And I think that you don't have to read too many science fiction novels or dystopian books like 1984, set in the UK, or think through the realities, which is that on the way walking over here, and I've said this many times, but now I'm here, there are more closed circuit cameras per person in this city than anywhere else in the world. And then everyone's like, well, of course, that's great, but that's the reason why we're so safe. And so you can keep going with that thinking process until we're completely tracked and we're completely safe. But as Edward Snowden would say, we're not exactly very free. So we use encryption every day. There's a couple of examples here. one of my favorites is not on here right now, which is Signal. And these are applications, especially ones that use what's called end-to-end encryption, are incredibly important. And encryption in its most widespread used form is every time you go to a website and it says HTTPS, not HTTP, but HTTPS. It's using what was called secure sockets layer. It's the encryption mechanism that's used between browsers and servers in websites. And this innovation, which actually came after the original innovation of the web, hypertext transfer protocol and Tim Berners-Lee and all the work he did there, meant that we could do e-commerce. It meant that we could do banking. It meant that information that was sent from your browser to a server was actually secure. It was encrypted. Only you and the person receiving it knew what was happening. You couldn't sit in the middle and grab the credit card information or your bank statement or whatever it was, or eventually your kids' pictures and so on. You just couldn't do that. That encryption is safe. End-to-end encryption in messaging is very important to think about. So certain messengers, like Telegram and Facebook Messenger, like Telegram, and they can be sort of optimized and set up in certain ways to make this possible. They don't actually do end-to-end encryption. They do encryption. They send messages which are ultimately stored on servers, and in flight, the messages can be decoded and taken out. Signal, on the other hand, is actually an end-to-end encrypted messaging system. And as you can imagine, governments don't like this. Why don't they like this? Well, because of all the bad people. And there are definitely bad people in the world. One story I have told many times, I'm not sure if I've told it on camera, is back in 2013 when I first got into Bitcoin, as it was, and it wasn't really cryptocurrency, but at that point it was just Bitcoin. I was asked to give a talk at SOCOM, which is the Special Operations Command Center of the United States Armed Forces, and basically every three-letter agency you could think of. And I gave a whole day session on why they should be really not that concerned about tracking cryptocurrencies, because it's all out there. And we'll talk about privacy at the end of this talk. Everything's actually public, as long as you know who controls different addresses and you can infer that from different ways. You can basically figure anything out. At the end, I said, well, there's one thing you should be concerned about, which is this thing called Zcash, which hasn't been launched yet, which we ultimately ended up investing in Pantera, which is doing much more private transactions. And at the end of this talk, a gentleman who I guess now had a rather similar haircut to the one I have right now, and was a bit stockier, he took me aside and he said, well, I just want to let you know, like, I enjoyed your talk and I'd like to reassure you. He's like, I work in the field. And I was like, well, which field is that? And he goes, we don't ask which field I'm in. I said, of course, I'm in the field. I was like, okay, I see. You're an operative. And he's like, yeah. And he said, well, the majority of the bad guys we catch are actually through infiltration. And so the difference between infiltration and mass surveillance can best be thought of by movie analogies. So mass surveillance is the Bourne Identity, if you've ever seen the movies. There's a bunch of people in Langley. There's always Langley. I don't know why, but they're in Langley and they're looking at stuff and they say, ha, like bad guy. And then they call some guy in Kansas. So I guess that's where they have the little missiles. And they press the button and a drone comes in and boom, everybody blows up. Mass surveillance leads to bad guys going away. But really, it's more like James Bond, which I kind of like because I grew up on James Bond, which is you got somebody who's like, pretending to be Syrian and like, has the right accent and like looks the right way and so on. And they're risking their life getting into these terrorist cells or other gangs or whatever the bad person is, and then infiltrating and then shutting these things down. And so the idea that if we just track everybody and know everything that has ever been said forever, we'll catch all the bad guys, I really challenge that that's the right solution. WhatsApp is under a bunch of pressure right now. They got acquired by Facebook, and we've seen a big movement from WhatsApp to guys like Signal and end-to-end encryption again. And there's a big fight out there. Like the governments don't like it, so we're seeing regulation. We're seeing people trying to overstep boundaries. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in the States. It's happening everywhere. In China, they just gave up. They're just like, fine, we'll just surveil everybody and all is well. But privacy as a right is really actually embedded in quite a number of aspects of the US Constitution, UK, European, like different aspects. It's not like there's a consistent document that says this is it, but it is recognized by the United Nations. and I certainly believe it's important. So there's another thing here, which is decentralization. So we talked about encryption, the idea of scrambling information, making sure that no one can read what's in the middle. That seems like a good idea. Well, there's a catch, which is that if let's imagine you're doing this through a server, the messages go through a server, right? And if that server becomes compromised, or if someone just decides to remove that server, they take control of a government and they're like, this messaging system shall not exist anymore unless they get rid of the end-to-end encryption. Well, now you got another problem, which is that you've gone from being secure and encrypted to now one where you have vulnerabilities. And we call this in the decentralized and cryptocurrency space, we call this the ability in decentralized systems to build things that are permissionless. So what do you mean by permissionless? Well, let's go back to, I was working in distributed, as it was called back then, systems in the early 2000s in peer-to-peer technologies, originally kind of file sharing and then enterprise applications. Now, when Bitcoin came along, the interesting thing about this was that it created a permissionless system in which you didn't need permission to hold value, right? And we can have a long conversation about, is it really a store of value if it keeps going up and down? And it's not really about the value of the thing itself. It's the fact that you're able to own and store that value. There's always this ironic thing when anyone, I mean, hopefully this doesn't get me in trouble, but like any one of us moves across a border and it says, are you carrying more than $10,000 worth or 10,000 pounds worth of liquid currency? And of course they mean cash, right? Because cash is this thing that's hard to track. Anyone who's going with crypto and it isn't got that stuff on exchanges is theoretically moving across that border with more than $10,000 of liquid value, because you control it, because you don't need permission. You don't need permission from a bank. You don't need permission from a government to hold Bitcoin and to move Bitcoin between one person and another. Why? Because it's decentralized. What I mean by that is that there's no one server which runs Bitcoin. There's no one person that runs Bitcoin. There are hundreds of these things. And with systems like Ethereum, there's even more. So that idea of having these centralized points of control for holding value and moving value between people is really one of the things that originally got me interested in this idea of distributed systems and specifically cryptocurrency, is I saw a lot of the challenges that developing nations had in just banking anybody. Now, in very impoverished parts of the world, the way you store value is you dig a hole and you stick the thing that's whatever is the value, like the currency, or maybe you have gold, in a hole and you store it there. The problem is that when the guy with the big stick comes along and he's running the village and he's like, well, I need all the people who've got stuff, otherwise I'm going to beat the people up you care about. You end up digging up the stuff in the hole and give it to the guy. So there's no real concept of banking in a lot of places. And if there is, and if they're set up in a more advanced way, often they're corrupt or they fail or so on. So the idea that in places like, we kind of call them like the unbanked parts of the world, we could actually leapfrog this entire concept of banking and move to a system of digital currency-based banking. I've always thought was very powerful. And again, that's permissionless. You didn't need the permission of a government. You didn't need permission of a bank to set these things up. Ethereum, which came along a few years later, really took this concept of permissionless systems to another level. Now, I lived in San Francisco for a couple of decades. I got very good at the old boys club of Silicon Valley. It was like I got good at raising money. I got good at building companies. I was good at playing that game. But in order to really get companies off the ground, there are always exceptions. You needed to know how to play that game. Sand Hill Road, eventually Angels, AngelList, and so on. It's like a game that people had to play. Ethereum changed that. Ethereum said, hey, you can put up an idea, and some of these ideas weren't very good. Some of them are very good. And you can raise money by putting up a smart contract address and take in Ethereum. And then you'll give people, the tokens, usually it was the way this was done, which represent the value in the systems you built. This was really interesting because it created a permissionless architecture by which you could raise money. And there were lots of really bad ideas. And there were a few really, really good ideas. And there were a few ideas that were just a little bit ahead of their time. And we're actually seeing some of these kick along now. But this basic idea of the ability to raise money in a permissionless way has been extended now and is really the basis for how decentralized financial systems not necessarily operate, but have been built. And now we see systems which are raised in an even more permissionless way. Systems that don't even have companies. They have what are called decentralized autonomous organizations, where the governance tokens of the system are held, usually a small amount, by the people who start it, but then they're not only given out in return for investment, but also earned by people as they're using the systems. So we're again seeing this like very permissionless idea. Now, the final example here on the slide is Filecoin, which is focused on a new idea, and this is really the beginning of what we call Web3 technologies. So Web3 is the idea of decentralizing the existing web. Like we've been doing this with finance, we've been doing this with banking. What if we could take the systems we're using today in this room, systems like streaming, what if they could be done in a way that didn't involve the other parts of the so-called FANGs, like, the Netflixes, the Amazon streaming, the guys at Apple who tell me what kind of movies I'm allowed to watch and what kind of movies I'm not allowed to watch because of their censoring system. I mean, they've got a control hold over me. Like Netflix has another control hold. Try streaming and getting money for your independent film that isn't within the big media, the new big media versions, the new Hollywood that's being built. Good luck with that. Just not going to happen. So we've been looking at ChangeTack a little bit. We've been looking in the last couple of years, and I'll try to avoid the sort of corporate commercial here, but I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing. We focus, and one of the reasons why we have this nice friendly bunny is we focus on a pretty scary idea, which is the idea that not only should you be free to move your money between people, not only should you be free to like raise money and build companies, but maybe you should be free to do something really fundamental, which we were talking about at the beginning, which is express yourself and access information. You can experience what a sort of dystopian world might feel like globally by getting on a plane today. You just get on a plane, and as long as you have the right visa, go to Beijing and try to use the internet. Try to use anything that you normally use, and you will not be able to. Now, there is an alternative, essentially parallel system of the same kind of companies you're used to. There's a Baidu instead of Google. There's Alipay instead of like Venmo, or many of the UK systems like Monzo. But the access to information, the information about what happened in Tiananmen Square, it's a controversial topic in China. Like, did it happen? Did it not happen? Was it a protest? Was it friendly? Did anyone die? Well, most people don't know in China because that information is censored. And the majority of the information on the internet is censored in China. So when next time you see something which is like, governments trying to fight certain bad people by shutting down encryption, end-to-end encryption, or certain world leader gets deplatformed, or this information is being censored because it's bad, people shouldn't talk about whether or not COVID is real. There's conspiracy theories about, was it made in a lab, was it not made in a lab? Some of that information is starting to get taken down, starting to be censored. It's a very slippery slope here. So what we've done is we focus on the idea of using decentralized systems to build a network using, essentially borrowing ideas from the existing VPN, or virtual private network space. So VPNs are a great technology. They allow you to hide information about where you're coming from, like your IP address. Often an IP address in this room that we're in right now, I could geolocate it and figure out where it's coming from, like that we're in this room. I could geolocate probably anybody here, the house. I could figure out this is your address based on your IP address. And so I would know then, if I was a website, hey, this person sitting in this place here is like, looks like it's this person. And if I can then correlate that information based on previous things that you've done that might have had personally identified information associated with, I can figure out who you are and what you're accessing. Now, yeah, of course, obviously you should trust big websites because they've always got a good track record, right? So nothing to worry about there. Your ISP, the guys who give you the carrier service, maybe you can trust them, maybe you can't. And in fact, you can't. There's track records of these companies selling information, using information, handing information over to all sorts of people whenever they ask for it with not even like a proper warrant. It's just like, hey, just give me the information, I'll take it. So VPNs allow you to do that. The problem with VPNs is you have to trust a VPN company, and they're just the same. There's some good ones, there's some bad ones. There's actually a lot of really bad ones. There's a few good ones. With Orchid, what we enable you to do is put together multiple network providers and basically hide information about who you are and where you're going from everybody. So we're kind of giving you the privacy network or the virtual private network that you expected, the one that you thought you were buying when you subscribed to these systems. There's a lot of other things we can do with it, and we're working on aspects of, we're talking about the idea of streaming and the idea of other applications you can run on these networks. We're live on the, let's see, what have we got here? Yeah, we're live on Android, iOS, macOS. We did some really interesting innovations because even though I'm a crypto person, I know personally that this stuff's not easy to use. So we enable you to fund this application using normal, in-app payments. I always click my fingers like this, but it's like, when you go online, you click on your phone, or you use your mechanisms on your Mac, and we're releasing Windows quite soon too, that allow you to not subscribe, but actually pay using small increments. If you want to spend $1 or €1 or £1, I guess we've got the wrong currency on this slide for the global audiences here, then you can do that. You can literally download our app, spend a small amount of money, get a connection, and then just throw it away. Never use it again if you don't want to, or like set up another connection. We think this is really powerful, and we've had some success in getting this out there and being used successfully. And we're very excited about the idea of extending what we're doing and extending and working with other companies to really try and embed this value that we talked about at the beginning, the idea of privacy, the idea of building in using not just encryption, but also decentralization into a specific application. We actually built this. This works today. You can download it, and it works. So I'm going to wrap up talking about a bit of a topical conversation. It was sort of one of the things I was asked to really address in this talk. Is we've heard, maybe you've heard of this concept of DeFi. It's the idea of decentralized finance. It's quite a topical thing within the crypto community right now. You've also probably heard about stablecoins. So stablecoins are essentially cryptocurrency representations of pounds, dollars, and euros. And these are really interesting because they enable you to move money very easily using not something that might move up and down in value, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but something that is actually pegged to $1 or €1 or £1. Decentralized finance, I'm not talking here about the Revoluts or the Monzos and so on. I'm talking like actually the rewiring of the underpinnings of the financial system, market making, arbitrage engines, the things that derivatives, the things that that enable the kind of the financial world to work. I mean, we're in the center of currency trading in the world, and the way that the way the farmer predicts whether or not there's going to be weather, and it allows him to hedge against the risk of really bad weather that's going to affect his crops. These things are done using core financial technology, and the crypto space is now rewiring this thing and using the same kind of ideas we talked about before, the permissionless kind of architectures. I'm a small market maker for certain currencies in decentralized finance. I didn't have to go to the Chicago Board of Options Exchange and get a special certificate or like take a certain thing. I just went in and put some money in and press buttons and off I go. And there's a lot of concern nowadays, especially by regulators, the idea that this is going to lead to some like world-changing cataclysmic events where they lose control of the central bank digital currencies, or not digital currencies, but central bank currencies, real ones, like their ability to print money and kind of do all these things that apparently make the economy work, is being challenged. Now, the problem with DeFi right now and privacy, and just generally privacy in crypto, is best explained using an analogy. So let's imagine I owed one of you some money, and so I go, okay, well, listen, I'll just give you cash. Okay, like I don't want to give you the electronic version. I'll just get you some cash, right? So we go to the ATM, the cash point, and I pull out £200 and I say, hey, here you go. And they're like, oh, thanks very much. And then you look at the serial number of that note. And with that information, you can access my entire financial record forever. Like ever since I have ever had a bank account when I was 12 years old. That's the way crypto works. That's privacy in crypto. Is using an address that I send you something. If I haven't been careful about the way I've protected my information, you have access to everything. Now, that sounds like a good idea, right? That's a fantastic setup. Well, there are solutions to these things. One solution is just being smart, is being careful about the addresses you use, the addresses that you tell people. I've been doing a small amount of collecting in the art space, the NFT, these things, these little JPEGs that people tell me are never going to be worth anything. But at one point in the previous life, I actually ran a physical gallery for kind of specifically street artists, and I think they are going to be worth something. I think they're very interesting. That address I'm happy to give people. Like, you can take a look at my little gallery collection. I kind of want people to look at it. I think it's kind of fun. But I'll never send a transaction from one of my other wallets that would identify the other things I do in this world. And then the quick thing that people start saying is, well, obviously you've got something to hide. You're trying to evade taxes. I'm like, not at all. I just don't want people to know, because why should you know everything I do? Why should you know all my bank records? I'm happy to have the government who I'm paying taxes to know the information. They should. This is a proper part of being in society. I believe people should pay taxes to pay for the things that we need as common goods. You can argue the economics and the sort of which side of these things you believe. Should we have very high taxes, low taxes? I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that we live in societies, and when we consume the services of that society, we need to pay for them. Otherwise, it's not fair. So I'm happy for the government to know this information. I'm not happy for all of you to know this information. I don't think you should. I think I should do what I want to do as long as I'm, obeying the laws. I should have this right to a privacy here. Unfortunately, we see governments getting very concerned and thinking that because there's an idea that some of this stuff, if you try really hard, will be private, that they should somehow then assume that there's some bad people out there that are trying to do bad things, and so on and so forth, back to the beginning of our conversation. So some of this stuff, maybe we've moved a little fast, so hopefully giving you some pointers to things you can research and understand. And part of this really is just to give you some things to think about, so that the next time you see a newspaper headline talking about the G7 wanting to crack down on financial privacy issues in crypto and how it's going to mess up the world, just stop for a second and do a bit of research and think about it from what are the kind of values that we're embedding here, and what should we do? So I got a final slide here with just a little bit of address information for me, the team at Orchid. I want to thank the gentlemen in this room who've helped me out with this fantastic presentation, and also the team at CogX and my team at Orchid and my partners at Fabric. It's lovely to be in London, and I look forward to seeing all of you again in person soon.
Thanks for such an insightful talk, Seven. I think you've really highlighted how the classic, oh, well, I don't have anything to hide response to privacy is really missing the nuance of so many things, and especially can be summed up by the question you pose at the start of, do you want to be safe or free? So thank you. And looking forward to seeing the rest of you in 20 minutes at 11 a.m. BST for Jeremy Miller and How Large is the Crypto Ecosystem? You are watching the Open Web Forum, curated by Fabric Ventures. Be sure to check out our Twitter, @Fabric_VC, and see you all in 20 minutes.